everybody, and welcome to Phoenix Cinema Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss what's showing at the historic Phoenix Cinema. This week, we are discussing The Boy and the Heron. I am Chris Austin.
I'm Ian Hawks.
And this week, unfortunately, Nate won't be with us, but we hope to have him back on the next one, also to hear his thoughts on this movie as well. I am, I'm so curious. I have a feeling we're going to fall on opposite sides of the spectrum on this. Cool. So, let's get into it.
Great. I'll go first because we might not be as on opposite sides of the spectrum as you think. I saw this I caught this like the last day it was in the cinema, and there was still a couple people there, which was fun. So there were some other people in the theater. I will say I'm a big Hayao Miyazaki fan, a big Studio Ghibli fan. I've watched pretty much most of the things that they've made and adored them a lot. And this movie, I don't think it's his strongest. And but I still think it's a kind of amazing. Like it's one of those funny things where I'm like, I still think Hayao Miyazaki might be like the greatest filmmaker of our generation. If I just like look at it kind of objectively. But I think I would be satisfied to say like, I don't think this is ever going to make it into like my top, maybe even into my top like 10 Studio Ghibli films. But there are still parts of it that I'm like, this is still better than any other animation I've seen in the last 40 years, you know what I mean?
Right,
or whatever
right.
it is.
Totally.
So it's like one of those funny things where I'm like, this one did not like blow me away, I think maybe in the ways that I had hoped. But at the same time, I still think Hayao Miyazaki is a master and kind of unrivaled to some degree. Yeah.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that point for sure. I mean, it's a shame Nate isn't here on this one because he's actually the one who introduced me to Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli through the film club that we're all a part of, especially in the early days. So we've only seen in the film club, what have we seen? My Neighbor Totoro, Howl's Moving Castle, Castle in the Sky, and what was the first one? Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, so and so I am still yet to see some others that are considered like the greatest. Yeah, I think at the time Nate was trying to build up to Spirited Away.
Spirited Away and like Princess Mononoke, I think, are kind of the ones that people like really talk about. They're I think the ones are going to be as the big hits in 20 years that people are still going to be watching.
Right. So I'm still yet to see those, so that's that's still a blind spot for me. However, I think he's singular. Miyazaki. He is just so singular. And one of the things that I love about his work is just the worlds and how brilliantly drawn and the little details. It's just like you said, the animation is always stunning. It's incredible. Yeah. Even though I kind of prefer the filmmaker Isao Takahata. In when it comes to Studio Ghibli, especially with the films I've seen of his, just Grave of the Fireflies and what was the other one that everyone loved in Film Club? I loved in Film Club and everyone else didn't. The Tale of the Princess Kaguya.
Yeah. I haven't, but I've heard great things about it.
Dude, I loved it, and everyone just like shit on it, and I was like, "What is
really?"
Yeah.
I've heard it's great. So I it's been on my list for a little while.
Yeah. So I with Takahata, he's kind of who I lean towards. Taking nothing away from Miyazaki. The funny thing about this film is, when I saw it in the cinema. Now, here's the thing: when I watch a film, I always have to pee at least once. Right? And so it becomes this really tough thing where, I go to the movies and I'm kind of like, I try and empty my bladder as much as I can before I head inside the screen. But then you've got to take into account the commercials, the trailers, right? So I try my best to leave and go to the toilet during the trailers. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and then I'll find myself in a situation halfway through the movie where it's like, okay, I need to go, but I want to time me leaving. I want to go on maybe that's not too significant, I don't know. So,
right.
So I'm watching the film this time, and within the first 10 or 15 minutes, I'm like, oh, God damn it, I've got to wee. I've got to go to the toilet. But so I'm thinking, where do I go? Because I'm really into this right now and I'm really engrossed. Now, the first 10, 15 minutes of this movie is pretty naturalistic, right? As far as things go, it's in a very straightforward, set in the real world. Everything is unfolding very naturalistic. And I thought, okay, they're having a conversation at the table. And I was like, this is my moment where I'm going to quickly go to the toilet. So I run out of the screen. I go to the toilet. I come back. This kid has got a bandage on his head. Something has happened to him. The dad's like, who hurt you? And this bird, the heron, flies into his room and starts talking to him. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. I missed the one point it all turned weird. And I was like, oh.
Oh, yeah. And then you're like, in retrospect, it's like, oh, you should have used the bathroom when all the parakeets showed up. Because that's really where the movie, I think, entered into a little bit of a lull.
Yeah, totally.
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. Well, I mean, you didn't miss too much in the sense that, well, he goes to school and he gets bullied, and then he he gets beat up, like his clothes are beat up. But then, kind of confusingly, in a move that I still don't fully understand, he picks up a rock and hits himself in the head with it.
Oh,
hard enough that he's needs to get stitches, he's bleeding heavily, and he kind of uses this as a cover of well, I fell off my bike, but it's also might be him not wanting to go to school potentially, like he doesn't want to get bullied again, so he's gonna hurt himself so bad he doesn't have to go back to school or something. And then, but the heron, I think the heron does talk for the first time right there. The heron talking is very fast and kind of has no lead up. The heron goes from being a normal bird to just suddenly showing up and talking to him.
Okay.
But I don't know if the movie would have been any more clear to you, because even after the film, it took me, I would say it's interesting that you bring up Takahata, because I think what Miyazaki I think does so brilliantly is he tells extremely visual stories where the only real concern I think of the characters involved is what's directly in front of them and what's happening with them. From my perspective, and he doesn't really deal a lot with what's happening internally for a character. There's not a lot of I feel there's not that many moments where he really wants you to get full access to the internal monologue of a character or something.
Okay, interesting.
And which I think means that sometimes in his films that are more subtle emotionally, like Howl's Moving Castle or this film, I think I get almost so blown away by the stunning visuals and this big stuff that then when these kind of emotional beats happen, sometimes I'm like, oh wait, what's that character feeling? It's almost like I lose the threads of the character sometimes. But then I find on kind of further examination, as I let it sink in more, or with a movie like Howl's Moving Castle, which now I've gone back and watched many times, it is all there. And once I kind of am aware of it, it's easier for me to follow. And I remember the first time I saw Howl's Moving Castle, I was so confused by it. I was like, why is he doing all these things that he's doing? It seems just kind of confusing and strange to me.
Oh, me too.
It was beautiful.
It was beautiful
and stunning.
It felt so convoluted. There's a lot going on there.
But now that I've seen it 4 or 5 times, it all I'm like, oh, these characters make perfect sense and their motivations make perfect sense. And I have a similar feeling with this one. It wasn't until I thought about the movie in preparation for this conversation where I was like, oh yeah, maybe he hit himself in the head because he didn't want to go back to school because he didn't want to be bullied again, and maybe his mother-in-law ran away for not mother-in-law, his stepmother ran away for these and these reasons. But I think those things you think about afterwards, I think in the film, you're so drawn in by the big visuals, talking birds and fish that are chanting and huge stuff that that a lot of times, and there's basically no scene that helps you understand why some of these more subtle characters are making their emotional choices, that I think can make it sometimes hard to travel along with. Whereas I think where Takahata I think is a director that I think is maybe a little more interested in the internal motivations of a character and like an emotional journey versus kind of a physical journey or something like that.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm so glad you're kind of looking at that comparison, because I was wondering, what is it that draws me in so much to Takahata's movies, where not always, but sometimes Miyazaki can leave me slightly cold, or it does feel like, again, in reference to Howl's Moving Castle, it feels so convoluted on a plot level. There's so much happening, and yet I'm so dazzled by how stunning it looks, that it's kind of... Yeah. Did you watch the dubbed version or the original language of this movie?
So I watched... It's funny you ask, because I watched the dubbed version. It was the only version showing at my cinema. And at first I was disappointed, because a lot of times I just like to watch the original language version of a film. However, I thought the voice acting in the movie was amazing, actually. And like the American acting, I enjoyed it a lot. And there were certain... I always enjoy when there's kind of like a star-studded cast of voice actors, but when you're watching a movie, you're not distracted by it, because you actually aren't quite... Like, for example, I had no idea that Rob Pattinson was playing the Heron.
Is he?
I just didn't know. And then I got to the end and I was like, oh my God, it was Rob Pattinson. And I'm like, he's an actor who I love, and I've seen like everything he's in, and he just did a great performance that I didn't make me think of him at all, but was still a really engaging performance. So there was a couple moments like that where I was like, because like Florence Pugh was in it, and Christian Bale, and like, there's these there was like Bale, a whole bunch of people in it. And some of them I recognized, but a lot I didn't. And then it wasn't until I saw the credits where I was like, oh, no kidding, that person did that character. So I don't know. I thought the voice acting was kind of enjoyable, but maybe you disagree.
Well, actually, no. I'm. It's a shame I didn't get to see the dubbed version. Now here's the thing.
Interesting. Okay.
When it comes to anything that's foreign, I do not want to hear anything dubbed. I will take subtitles any day. I just want to hear the original, language. However, Studio Ghibli is the only thing where there's this block where I can't actually listen to the original language version. I get lost trying to follow the subtitles, and I was asking myself why that is. I honestly think it's to do with the animation itself. It's so bright, it's so colorful, there's so much to look at that when your eyes are drawn to the text that you have to follow, it becomes so easy to kind of get lost in that.
Totally. That makes sense. There's so much going on screen that it's almost a shame to have to look away from it.
Yeah, that's totally it. And I think that's the situation that's the problem I have. So every other Studio Ghibli film, especially Miyazaki's, it's been with the dubbed cast, and I love it. I love it. Like you said, hearing these, then there's huge names, and hearing these great actors doing such great voice work, but it kind of connects me to the material. Whereas this time, they were only showing the original language, version in the cinema. So I was like, okay, well then here we go. And I guess it wasn't that big of a deal, because I was in the cinema, and you can't help, the screen is so huge, you can't help but just... But I guess it was still the same thing. I was kind of like, now you're saying that Robert Pattinson voices the Heron. I really want to just go back and watch the dubbed version.
It's cool. His performance in particular is great, and then Willem Dafoe does a great little bit performance of the pelican that's like dying kind of grotesquely, and it's also, that's a very engaging.
Oh God!
And that one you can kind of tell. Like when he starts talking, you're like, oh, it's Willem Dafoe, but it's good. It's really good.
I'm getting. We just had to watch Antichrist in film club, the last Von Trier film. So now that you mentioned Willem Dafoe's name, and I'm getting a shiver down my back.
That's so funny, man. But no, I will say that like the Ghibli stuff is the best, I think, American dubbed animation of just about any animation I've seen. I mean, I think they always do a top-notch job, I think, of translation and like lip matching, and then they get a great cast and stuff. Like I think they are some of those films where I do enjoy watching the English language version, because I'm like, oh, they're, like a lot of them I still watch in Japanese as well, but then whenever I switch over to the English language version, I'm like, oh, this is properly good. This is really actually
definitely
a good dub. And
watching the film, It was a struggle.
Yeah.
This movie was a bit of a struggle for me. And you know what's crazy? I actually found myself at times kind of drifting off, almost falling asleep in the cinema. And I was shocked by that. But there's usually with the previous Miyazaki films I've seen, this really, sometimes he connects this really emotional through line or undercurrent. I'm thinking of My Neighbor Totoro and these kids who have their mother in the hospital, and it all seems very emotionally sort of connected and visceral in a way that I was watching this one and I was like, I'm losing. As visually stunning as it was, I just found myself really struggling to connect with it, and I don't know why, because he's still doing the same thing, right? He's telling this really like clear emotional story on the surface, and yet everything that was happening, I was like, I don't know, man.
I actually agree with you, and it's hard for me to say because I adore him so much as an artist. My brother follows Miyazaki's work really, really closely and listens to interviews with him and with Toshiro Suzuki, his producer, a lot. So I'm getting this information kind of secondhand, so I may be misquoting some things, but I guess because it won the Oscar for Best Animation.
Oh, that's recently.
Right. And I guess Miyazaki and Suzuki were not present at the Oscars, but they released a statement afterwards thanking the Academy. But they kind of said, like, we're so grateful that you gave us this award because this movie was really hard to make. Like, we're old men now, and it's getting really hard to make movies, and this took us like 10 years to make. So, like, thank you so much for recognizing that. Oof. And like, I do get the sense a little bit. I mean, the joke is that Miyazaki, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but like Miyazaki's retired 3 times. So like he always says, this is my last movie. And then he kind of does another one.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
This is technically, this movie is like the 3rd movie that's brought him out of retirement.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And I think one of the things that he has said is like, the reason why he feels like he's getting too old to direct movies and needs to retire is not because he's like run out of ideas or has no interest anymore. But he really feels like a director's job is to be responsible for every single thing on screen. I mean, he storyboards, he paints, hand paints and draws every single like storyboard of his movie. And that's the way that he writes. So this is crazy. He doesn't start with he doesn't do a script. He just starts at the beginning of the movie and just goes through the film, like every single shot, until he gets to the end. And then there's these amazing there's this amazing documentary about him where he's working on, I can't remember which film he's working on, Ponyo or something, and he just sits in it's great, it's this big room of like 30 animators, and then there's just a little desk in the corner, and there's Hayao Miyazaki over there just drawing. And then one day the documentarian is in there, and Hayao Miyazaki stands up and like stretches a little bit, and he goes, well, I finished the movie. And everybody just stands up and like claps, and he like bows and then just leaves the room.
Oh my word.
And it's like he just starts at the beginning and then goes, and then what all the other animators are doing is they're like filling, they're actually animating the characters and filling in the keyframes and doing all this stuff. But like my understanding of it is that the movie is not, they don't know how the movie's going to end even as they're beginning the beginning.
Does he know how the movie's...
I don't think so either. No, because he'll get stuck sometimes halfway through and then have to like take a break to like figure it out or something.
So he's just like improvisational jazzing his way through the whole storyboard, which is the script. What?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's amazing.
It's amazing.
I'm now going to give this movie 5 stars. Are you serious?
No, his process is incredible. He's a complete like savant kind of, and he's totally brilliant. And but I do think... I think what there were actually, so one of the first things I noticed when I started watching the film is I kind of leaned forward in my chair because I was like, some of the characters didn't quite look like Miyazaki characters. Like some of the angles on their faces, and I've seen a lot of his films, so it felt kind of like sudden to me. Like some of the faces felt a little more angular or a little more kind of caricatured in some places. Something about some of the animation of a couple of, in particular, like the side characters or like the crowds, felt just different. And at first I was like, maybe he's kind of developing his style a little bit. But I have a theory, and this could be a wrong theory, that I think he's just outsourcing a little more of his work in this film. I think he's just not necessarily drawing every single character, and maybe doesn't have the the kind of like space anymore in his life to go through every single frame and kind of correct things. Because I think his process normally is he does like the first drawing and gives the direction, and then an animator goes and does it, and then he goes back in and fixes their drawings.
Right. Okay.
And I just get the sense that he just doesn't maybe have the energy for that anymore. And I do feel like it was a little sad. I do feel like I watched the film and I'm like, oh, I mean, it's still brilliant. It's still this amazing piece of art. I still think it will be remembered fondly in his canon of work. But I think that he's not wrong when he's saying, like, I don't know if I have the attention to detail anymore that I would like to have when I approach my films, kind of thing.
That is so interesting. And actually, I don't think that your theory is too far off. I think that's what, at least from what I've read about the film, is that there were, 1,000 collaborators on this.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I even heard, and I'm forgetting the name now, but the director of like a pretty famous anime, I guess, was to some degree almost kind of co-directing it with him.
Ooh, okay.
If I remember hearing it correctly. So yeah, I think a part of me kind of hopes this is his last movie, actually, which is a weird thing to say, but I kind of respect maybe his own evaluation of himself of being like, I don't know if I have the energy for this art form anymore as it is,
Mm-hmm.
Because and I don't know, I'm curious to go back and watch this movie in like a year or two and see. I do have, this is also funny, I'll share another Hayao Miyazaki anecdote. So they opened like a Studio Ghibli park, like a theme park in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And so the New York Times, I think it was the Times or some American newspaper, sent somebody out, to like go experience the Ghibli park. And and this person gets on a train, it's in some rural neighborhood in Japan. And they'd ride on this train and they get off the train and it's like almost like an empty train station. And there's like a little sign that's like, Hayao Miyazaki Park, like this way. And they go like walking down like a dirt road for like a half mile. And then there's like little signs all along the way that are like keep going, like Hayao Miyazaki Park. And they get there and like it's just a park of like trees and grass. And there's like beautiful sculptures there and like some other things. And there's like people standing around to like welcome you. And they're like, yeah, enjoy the scenery, like enjoy nature. And the person was like, Did you just build a park so that people would go on a walk in the countryside? And they were like, yes.
No way.
They were like, it's a park, and it's not like it was misadvertised. Like it's not like the Willy Wonka thing where it was a scam.
Right.
Like it's not like it cost $600 to get in. And it's like when you go look at the advertising, it's like, no, that's exactly what they said it would be. They said it would just be like a woodland forest park that you get to walk through. But I think Miyazaki is deeply invested in this. I think he understands the fame that he wields as a director. And I think he's invested in making the world a better place. Sometimes I think in a stubborn kind of old man way. So the story about that with this movie is, the Japanese title of the film is How Do You Live, which is the title of a very famous book in Japan that was published in like the 1930s. And it's actually in the movie. So there's a little segment where he finds that book that his like mother left him. I don't know if you even remember this. It's such a small moment.
Yeah.
He finds this book in the desk and he's like, oh, this must have been my mother. She must have left it for me to read.
Yes.
And the book is How Do You Live? It's a real book. And this book is apparently like read in like across like in school, like school children read it. So I actually listened to the book. It's a short book, so I actually listened to it on audiobook. But the book did not have an English translation until Miyazaki announced that he was making this movie and was titling it How Do You Live? And then everybody was like, oh, is your next movie based off of this book? And apparently he was like, yes. And then they translated it to English. The book has no connection to the movie whatsoever.
Oh my God.
None at all. And I have a personal theory that Miyazaki just found out the book was not translated to English and that nobody in America knew about it. It's a beautiful book. It's about morals, how to live your life correctly, how to like treat people fairly and equitably, how to be kind to the poor, how to like recognize your own faults and become a better person. It's gorgeous. I've loved the book so much. And I think Miyazaki just was like, wait, Americans don't know about this book? They aren't reading it? He's like, I'm going to make a movie so that people go read this book.
That's amazing. Well, surely the author of the book is a little pissed off, right? Because the author of this book has gone around, told all his friends and family. So, yeah, Miyazaki's next film is
Well, I don't know if he's even living, because the book was published in like 1937. The book was published like a long time ago. It's almost 100 years old. It's like a classic, kind of a classic piece of Japanese literature to some degree.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But it's actually funny because it's almost making me like the movie less as I read the book, because the book I think would actually make a really good Miyazaki movie, but it has nothing to do with The Boy and the Heron. It's like a story about like these four friends in grade school who kind of get into different situations and get into trouble, and there's these beautiful, lovely scenes about him kind of meeting new people and being in social situations that put him out a little bit, and him growing up as kind of a coming of age story. And as I'm listening to it, I'm like, this would make a really good Studio Ghibli movie.
Right.
But anyways, that's my personal theory on this movie. I think it's all just so Miyazaki could be like, go read this book, and I'm going to make a movie on the side.
That's fascinating. Wow, that's fascinating. So what did you think what did you think this film was about? I mean,
yeah,
I know there was a lot there to do with sort of an acceptance of. So we never really get into the plot of these films, but this young kid is basically, his mother dies in a fire in a hospital, and he moves with his father. Right, they move somewhere else. His father's got a new girlfriend, and they go to start this new life.
And it's his mother's sister. His father remarried his aunt. I don't know if you caught that element. It took me about 45 minutes into the film to figure it out.
I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't get that.
I don't blame you for not getting it. It's one of those things that feels like in an American film, or I mean, in a lot of films, they would have just said right out. But they really kind of sunk the lead on that one.
Dude, that's major.
It's major, I know.
Now I've got to have a whole rethink here about what the hell. Yeah, okay. Well,
but in any case, yes.
In
his
that
dad
case,
gets remarried.
Yeah, it's not just an acceptance of a like a step, parental figure. It's just literally this kid's journey to accepting his aunt or his mom's sister
as his mom,
as his new mom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's clear.
And it was not very clear.
Right.
Like it's so funny. It was one of those movies where I think like. Yeah, for the first 20 minutes, I was like, that's what this is about. And I was pretty engaged with that story, actually. And then we got, she went missing, and there was the heron, and there was like the fish, and there was kind of the old mysterious tower, which I thought was a cool set piece and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, it's going to be about him like coming to grips with his aunt. And then I think the whole adventure in the tower, to me, just did not do anything for that storyline. Like, the adventures in the tower were interesting visually and dramatically, but they did nothing to me to kind of help me feel like he was understanding his relationship to his aunt better or anything. And then you introduce this uncle character, which is a brand new person, and then you go on to have I think what for me was actually the most kind of emotionally interesting moment of the film. And this is, I don't know, spoiling it, I guess, a little bit. The film's been out for a long time, but like, he shows up, you realize like this world his uncle's created, right, is like balanced on these blocks kind of, and they're falling apart. It's not quite working. And then the uncle is like, I'll give you the power to make a new world with these new blocks, and they're totally clean and pure. And then the kid is like, no, I can't do that. I'd rather go back and live in the real world. In short, there's some other elements, and then he kind of does. He basically chooses to live in kind of an imperfect world rather than kind of living in a fake world that's perfect. Which, to me, I thought was like, oh, that's cool. Like I can sink my teeth into that, right? Like this idea of accepting the need for loss and pain and stuff rather than kind of living in an escapist world.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
To me, that was like not it's like the film started off as this thing between the relate. Like, I don't see necessarily how that's the answer to the question I felt like I got at the beginning of the film.
Yes.
So
I think I'm with you there.
Yeah.
I think I'm with you there.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Yeah, it just loses me. It just loses me, which is such a shame. Like I said, the first 10 minutes before I needed to pee, I was so invested. What would you pair this movie with?
That's a great question. So after listening to the book, that it's kind of, I guess, it is based. There are some similarities in the themes, I think, in the book. I would actually pair this with. It's kind of funny because I'm pairing it with another Ghibli film, but I would pair it with probably my favorite Ghibli film, actually, My Neighbors the Yamadas. It's not a Miyazaki film; it's a Takahata film.
Oh, now I'm interested.
And My Neighbors the Yamadas is like. It's an episodic story. It's like a bunch of tiny little short films all about like a family in just like suburban Japan. And it's like very silly and cute and but very, I think, like morally I think Miyazaki wanted to tell like a really morally deep story, a story about like accepting the need for kind of everyday life potentially and everyday suffering and stuff, while still telling a story that was full of vibrancy and interest. And for me, I think like My Neighbors the Yamadas does a very good job of that.
Oh, I love it. What's it called? My Neighbors the Yamadas?
My Neighbors the Yamadas.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll text you the link
Please,
to it when we hop off the call.
Takahata movie, that's gone straight to the top of my list. Oh, that's awesome.
It's fun. It's a fun one.
Okay. I've gone with something that's it's a little weird because it doesn't really compare, but I've gone with The Little Princess from 1995. Yeah. Have you seen it? Alfonso Cuarón's one of his early films.
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
no, I haven't seen it.
It's it kind of, the beginning of this film kind of reminded me of it. Very much so. Just about it's kind of about this young girl whose father goes off to war. He's sent, or he enlists in World War I, and she's sent to like this strict boarding school while he's gone. And while he's away, she gets news that he's been killed, and she has this horrible sort of like headmistress who runs the school, but she kind of has to make friends with these other kids. And so it's like this story of an orphan, and I really got those vibes from the first 10 minutes of this movie. He has to go to a new location and assimilate in this new environment. And yeah, I haven't seen it in so many years, but I remember it really made an impression on me when I was...
It looks cool. I'm looking at stills of it. I mean, Cuarón's an amazing director.
Oh.
It'd be cool to watch like I haven't... Most of his stuff I've seen is quite serious. It'd be cool to watch a kind of a children's film.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I actually looked up, because when I looked this movie up, I couldn't believe it was Cuarón. I was like, no way. I never knew that.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's great. That's great.
I would be loath to not mention one final thing, and that's just to praise Joe Hisaishi and his music.
Oh, yeah.
It was beautiful. It always is. He's the real MVP of the entire Studio Ghibli. I love it. He's actually doing a concert in London in a few months at the Royal Albert Hall.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
that'd be so cool if you can catch that.
My God,
awesome.
I'd love to. I'd really, really want to. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a master. And he amazes me how every one of his soundtracks really feels unique, but somehow still has his charm to it, It's like...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's each one is so beautiful. It's really lovely.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ian. I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Agreed.
Thank you so much, pal. I just want to say a special thanks to the Phoenix Cinema. Looking forward to discussing the next one. Our music is by Stefan Krieger, and this episode was edited by Noah Anderson. And if you want to go watch a movie, head to the Phoenix Cinema, and I will meet you there.
Take care.